Hello, everyone. I'm Jason Perez,
And I'm Wesley Long.
and we're bringing you a fresh new take on disaster preparedness.
Welcome to DisasterClass.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to DisasterClass. I'm Jason Perez.
And I'm Wesley Long.
And you know what that means, Wesley.
Class is back in session.
Class is in session. Well, welcome everyone back. And in this episode, we're going to pick up where we left off in our Prep 101. You may recall in our last episode, we discussed the concept of performing a risk assessment. Well, now we're going to discuss what we do with that information. And the subject that we're going to be talking about today is hazard mitigation.
Absolutely. And we have some guests coming in to talk about that. Talk about one way to mitigate the impacts of a hazard, because it's very, very important for us.
Yep. But first, just as a class announcement, and many have been asking us about what is currently going on in Ukraine, and our thoughts and prayers are with all the people that are suffering as a result of the conflict there. But we've been getting some questions as how does one actually prepare for something like that? A lot of what we talk about is natural disasters like hurricanes and floodings and things like that. But how do we prepare for something like war? The simple answer is we prepare for it the same way we prepare for any other hazard. We educate, we prepare, and equip ourselves. We do our best to understand the hazard, to stay informed as to what is going on. And actually, Wesley, you like to talk about the lifelines.
Yeah, the community lifelines is something that we will get into in a future episode. We're gonna break that down to make sure everybody understands what those are and how valuable they are to a community. The fact that they're called lifelines kind of gives you a clue. But what we need to do is we need to understand in any issue, any disaster, war, whatever it is, we need to understand how our community lifelines are impacted. Then we have to make a plan for how we will act if a hazard occurs. Like, what are we going to do when this thing happens? And then equip ourselves with the supplies and tools we need to sustain ourselves, especially if our community lifelines are no longer providing that sustenance for us.
Yeah. And just kind of like an overview of just kind of like you mentioned, but lifeline specifically, these are essential functions and services within our community that we rely on. Things like communication, food, water, shelter, transportation, energy, all these things. So we get these things from our community, but when they're impacted, we don't have access to them anymore, like Wesley said. Right. So now what? and the thing I think that is the key, which we'll get into when we talk about it more in depth, is, as Jason mentioned, that infrastructure is already in place in every single community that we live in. We just haven't always understood the individualized components and how they make up sustaining life for us. Yeah. So they're already there. The infrastructure is already there. When an incident happens, those things become impacted and sometimes are no longer available. Mm-hmm. So that's why we educate, prepare, and equip, right? The equip builds up your supplements what is missing from a community lifeline. Exactly. Excellent. And we go into this concept very deeply in our community emergency planning class, which is, if you haven't taken it already, it's definitely a great thing to do, because we take a holistic approach at disaster planning, not hazard specific, but a holistic approach to just how we plan for hazards in general, because the principles fundamentally stay the same. Yep. So like one of the things is, during a hazard, what are we going to do? So either we're going to stay or we're going to go. We're going to evacuate or we're going to shelter in place. So like what's going on in Ukraine, there may be an option to either flee to try and get out or shelter in place and hunker down and try and stay safe. But a lot of it is you have to use good situational awareness, being aware of your surroundings, because, a situation like that is very fluid. It's changing constantly. So a lot of, some of the response happens in the moment. We have to really have a good grasp of the situation to be able to make a good decision.
And that's why we recommend going through the class, so you don't have to make those split-second decisions in a high-stress situation, right, where lives are impacted. Come to the class, take the class, so that you can make those decisions in a nice, cool, calm, collected area with your resources around you to understand what's best. Then when the time comes, all you have to do is enact plan 2 or plan 3 or plan 4, whatever it was for that hazard that is now impacting you. So that's why we stress so much staying ahead, being preemptive when it comes to the education and the preparedness.
Yeah. And just one of the other things we go through really in depth is creating an emergency plan, actually having a plan ahead, what you're going to do. The more thought you put into that, when something like this happens where it's like out of the moment, like, whoa, where did this come from? You'll be in a much better position to go and help yourself.
Yeah, your readiness will then be instinctual.
That's it. Well, I think that's all we have for homeroom. We're gonna go into these topics a lot more as we go on, like the concept of community lifelines. We're gonna dedicate a whole episode to that. We already have that planned out, and we'll be talking through it as we go. But don't go away. When we come back, we're gonna dive into our Prep 101, and then we're also gonna hear from our special guest. So don't go anywhere.
DisasterClass is brought to you by Instinct Ready. Instinct Ready is working to educate, prepare, and equip the everyday person for disasters through comprehensive education and premium products. DisasterClass listeners can get 10% off site-wide at instinctready.com with promo code DisasterClass. Shop items like the U-Pack Pro, the most versatile, practical, and functional 72-hour survival system available, and learn how to plan for disasters with the Community Emergency Planning online course. Visit instinctready.com today because preparedness starts at home.
All right, everyone. Well, it's time for Prep 101, where we discuss and break down an important preparedness concept. Today, our topic is mitigation. So, Jason, what is mitigation?
Mitigation. It sounds like a big word, but it's really not all that bad. It's not all that scary. Mitigation is essentially actions that you will take to either prevent or minimize the impacts of a hazard. So in our last episode, we discussed identifying and assessing risk through a risk assessment. You might recall that. So we talked about how we first need to identify our hazards, both the natural and the man-made, and assess how they will impact us if they occur. So now after going through that process and you understand, break down that risk, now we can start to take steps to either prevent the hazard from occurring altogether or minimize how bad it's going to affect us.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So now let's break that down. So for example, say you've done your hazard identification and you have identified that severe windstorms is a hazard that's a risk in your area. And then you realize that you have a lot of trees around your house in the vicinity of it. So the question is, how can you mitigate the impacts of a potential hazard that could be coming? Well, we can trim the tree branches or remove the trees altogether, right? That's a specific action that we can take so that if a windstorm comes, we'll be lessening the damage, right? We can successfully now mitigate the impacts of that particular hazard and the effects that it can have on us as an individual and for a family, right? So again, the value is there. But you may ask this question, right? Why? Right? To some people, we might look at it and say, well, this seems very costly, very time consuming. Yep. I got to get my checkbook out to do that. And that is a very fair observation. And you are correct that there is a cost in that scenario. Absolutely. But here's the question. How costly and time consuming would it be if you didn't take those steps? Right?
Yeah.
That's the question that you really should be asking. How bad could it be? And then what is the risk to potential life and safety if you don't take those steps, right? So when you look at it against that canvas, sometimes it's like, oh, okay, yeah, now that might be super valuable.
Yeah. So we discussed the how, but really here's the why. By not taking the steps to mitigate hazards, you are exponentially increasing your disaster risk. Hazard mitigation is one of the most beneficial things we can do in our society to decrease disaster risk, but it is fundamentally the hardest thing that we can get people on board with doing because it typically involves an investment of time, energy, and resources and money. But here's what studies have shown. Studies have shown that for every dollar that you spend investing in hazard mitigation, right, taking those steps to prevent or minimize the impacts of a hazard, you save on average $6 to $8 in recovery costs. Yeah. So now going with the example that you just talked about, Wesley, about the trees, right? So let's say that you're going to trim those trees, you're going to take them down. Now there's going to be investment. Let's say maybe $4,000 to $5,000 to remove those trees,
It's reasonable.
But think about how much it would cost to now replace your roof or other parts of your home, perhaps even the whole home.
Right. Yep.
If that tree fell on your house. But even something like a roof, maybe $20,000, $30,000 to replace that roof. So, okay, it's going to cost a little money up front, but think about how much you'd be saving in the long run by actually making that investment, right? It's going to save in the long run.
Right. So now that's from the personal scope, right? But we're also trying to teach our listeners to be thinking about the whole community, right, when they're making their personal decisions and with these concepts that we're talking about in Prep 101. So in the past couple episodes, we've talked about this, right? Disasters cost hundreds of billions of dollars in damage every year.
To the society and the economy.
Right. Like if you look at it from a global perspective, that's a massive amount of money. So we're talking about severe economic impacts on communities the world over. So collectively, as people can investigate in mitigation, we can significantly reduce that number of recovery because we spend it up front in mitigation.
Yeah. So on the emergency management end, emergency managers are always looking for ways to mitigate risks, right, to reduce that overall cost of disaster risk. But when it comes to mitigation for homeowners, right, thinking about our listeners or our homeowners, some of the biggest risks that you might face are probably going to be flood and wind damage. Now, I found a really nice list of some mitigation ideas for homeowners that was created by FEMA. I'll go ahead and I'll post that in the description and the show notes. It offers some really good suggestions for mitigating those two common hazards, wind and flood damage. Now, when they talk about mitigation, really, we could spend hours and hours talking about it because it is such an important subject, and we're probably going to continue talking about it. But we'll get with that later down.
Right. We'll get there. But for this, if we're going to put something in a doggy bag that we can take away, right, so we can consume that meal a little bit later, the key is mitigation is extremely important. We can't understate that, right? You can't overstate it either. It's something you should definitely be looking into as you're preparing yourself and your family for your community. But again, you first need to understand the hazards in your local area before implementing a mitigation strategy, right? You can't mitigate what you don't know. So you have to educate yourself first, do the hazard identification and the risk assessment first. But now, Jason, here's a question for you. If we have done all we can to prevent or mitigate a hazard, but, what if we still have a significant risk?
That's an excellent question. Right. What do we do now?
Right, we've tried to chop it down into bite-sized pieces. Right, we're trying to mitigate as much as we can to minimize the maximum potential of that risk. But what if there's still quite a bit of risk? What do we do?
That's a good question. I think we have some folks who can help us answer that question. Okay. So don't go anywhere. When we come back, we're going to get to hear from our special guests and talk about this subject a little more. When you need an emergency plan, you need Doberman Emergency Management. Their expert practitioners use best practice, data, and career experience to help you. So whether you're buying a home and want to know about your local hazards, or you're a professional needing additional support, Doberman Emergency Management can help. Visit DobermanEMG.com today to learn more. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to DisasterClass. And today we have some special guests with us. We have Brandon Troutner and Austin Grant, insurance agents for Farmers Insurance in the Cheyenne, Wyoming region. Brandon and Austin, welcome to DisasterClass. Good to have you.
Glad to be here.
Good to have you guys with us.
Yeah, we're happy you're here. We appreciate your expertise.
Awesome. So,
thanks for letting us join.
No worries. So one of the topics that we've been talking about is this idea of hazard mitigation, and in an attempt to prevent or minimize the impacts of a particular hazard, whether it be flooding, wind, anything like that. Now, we can't always prevent or decrease the impacts from a disaster risk. We may always have a measure of risk. So in those cases, we can now transfer our risk to a third party, and that's where insurance comes in. So I think it's really important for our listeners to really understand the insurance world, why they need it, and so they can make better informed decisions. So to you and in your industry and your experience, why is having adequate insurance coverage so important?
Like you've already alluded to, the idea and the purpose of insurance is simply to transfer that risk. If somebody has a catastrophic claim, do they want to pay that $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 out of pocket, or is it a whole lot easier to swallow a $1,000 deductible and have their insurance company take care of, the bulk of the damage and those repairs? But that being said, the coverage is important because we want to make sure more than anything that if something does catastrophically go wrong on the cars, the house, whatever the case may be, they've got the coverage to take care of whatever can come their way. I mean, you're not going to be able to say, okay, we're going to cover every little thing, every little price, but I mean, we can take steps to make sure that 99% of cases are covered or are adequately covered, financially,
Right.
so that they don't get financially ruined.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you say that the majority of people have adequate coverage, or do people kind of get themselves into a jam sometimes?
No, no, they don't. There are companies, and I'm not going to mention any names, that on the auto side, they are known for state minimum liability coverage, $25,000 per person, $50,000 per accident, and they do it because it's cheap. They get a lot of business out of it, and great. I'd love to have a lot of business too, but I want the right business. I want the people that, want the education of how their coverage actually works, how it impacts them. If we flood our business with a bunch of, state minimum liability, those are also the people that are more likely going to leave on price. Mm-hmm. They're going to have a lot of claims. So, we welcome anybody, but I would say our main focus is the people that want the education of, here's how your insurance works, here's the purpose of it, and here's how it's going to impact you in a long-term setting. And Austin's kind of starting to see a lot of that in some of the stuff he's doing and people that he's talked to in the last couple of months, and he's starting to see the importance of that coverage as well.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Yeah, because I think when we talk about adequate insurance coverage, some of the concepts that we're talking about with our listeners is really learning how to identify and assess their personal risk to disasters, right? In our last episode, we discussed, how we go about doing that process, and how we can take, we can't really take steps to protect ourselves until we understand what that risk is. Mm-hmm. So I feel like it's probably the same thing in the insurance world. Like it's hard to get them set up with a good policy and coverage without really understanding that risk. I think I had been talking with Austin about this, but what kind of steps do you guys take or to educate the customer to really understand what they should be doing?
Austin, you want to speak to that? You're doing a great job in that department.
Yeah, absolutely. That is actually kind of my favorite part about this job, because I think it goes right in tandem with the fact that everybody thinks that a good insurance is cheap insurance. And when we get to sit down, preferably in person in office, and actually I put up a blackboard and I ask them basic insurance terms. Do you know like what your policy says? Do you know the difference between bodily injury and medical payments? Do you know the difference between a percentage deductible and a flat rate? Or the basic insurance of the basic concept of transfer risk, or those kinds of things. which is shocking, the amount of people who don't know that. So before I talk any numbers, I try and get them to understand the concepts and what they should be looking for in general.
Wow. Yeah, I can imagine there's a big knowledge gap there that you're trying to fill to help them understand it. So with that, a question could be, how often should they reevaluate their coverage?
I would say the absolute longest somebody should go without reevaluating their insurance needs is 24 months at the longest.
Okay.
Ideally, I want everybody in my office within 12 to 18 months of starting their policy. Life happens. People get married, people get divorced, people have kids, spouses, may die, there so many myriad of things that can happen in life. We want to, within our office, stay ahead of the game and ahead of the curve on that, be proactive and not reactive. We don't want to wait until something happens and then, okay, how do we fix it? We want to identify, what's going on in that person's life, what their needs are in that particular moment, and then find the insurance coverage that fits those needs at that point.
Yeah. I think you hit on a key thing, right? Proactive, not reactive. That I think that could be like a theme for disaster preparedness, and 100%. It's something we're always pushing and striving for. It's funny because I think sometimes we tend to view insurance as this evil thing that we just have to have.
And that we hopefully never use.
And we hopefully never use.
It's kind of like a go bag.
It is kind of like a go bag, yeah. Side point. Perhaps, do you have any stories that highlight the needs, just in your own experience, of why people should take it seriously? Wow. Or if you're watching on YouTube, if you're not watching on YouTube, I mean, Austin's hand shot straight up.
I think he's been waiting for this question.
Yes, he had that one holstered, ready to go. So, Austin, proceed, please.
It's a perfect question, because we just had a meeting with some roofing guys, and they had the best story about bad insurance. So these guys, a separate plug for them, Stonescaping, they're awesome. They actually do like a coated metal roof on they're getting big in the area. Well, they had gone out to a claim for some people who, typical, like, get online, find the cheapest insurance, and then just click yes and go. These people, their property coverage was so the property value, the dwelling value was $330,000, right? Nice home. Down in Colorado, the housing's a little more expensive there. They had a wind and hail claim, which is really common for the area. Their deductible on their plan, you guys want to take a guess at it?
No clue.
No clue.
No clue. I can't even estimate.
Let's do some math. All right. So their deductible that they had signed on with was a 10%. So you take 10% of a $330,000 dwelling coverage policy. How much do you think that roof was?
$1,000.
Yeah.
One more time, Brandon.
$33,000 out of that insurance pocket.
$33,000. They ended up having to cut a deal with the roofer to pay for the whole roof themselves out of pocket, because they didn't know what their deductible was, and it was more expensive than the roof itself.
Wow.
Okay, so this is a really bad example of mitigation.
Yeah.
You're not helping.
Also, a really bad example of an agent not doing his job and getting that insured into their office to review their policies once in a while.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
So this is that. I mean, it's such a simple thing where it's like you can't control the weather, but you can control what you do to prepare for it. And the effect, because they didn't prepare for it, was a huge impact on their finances. I mean, it was pretty bad. Well, actually as bad as it could be.
Right. And I think the horrible thing is they actually thought they were prepared, because in their mind, oh yeah, we have insurance, but not knowing all the, wow. That's an extremely valuable nugget for our viewers and our listeners.
Yeah, that's
don't just have the thing because you think you have to have the thing. And like you said, I went online and I clicked the yes box for everything, and I have insurance. What do you know about your policy? What do you know about your coverage? Wow.
Yeah.
So
I think what kind of kills people in that situation is that I'm sure when they were online and they went with that 10% deductible, it drops the premium down. So month to month, they're like, oh yeah, I'm making out like a bandit, but that's not the point of insurance. Insurance is not supposed to be cheap. Insurance is supposed to transfer risk. And they ended up paying all that money in premium and not transferring any risk.
Yeah, they're paying money for nothing at that point.
How much did the roof actually cost?
They cut a deal for, I won't give you a 100% quote, but I think it was around $35,000.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Insane. So just you guys obviously know what you're doing, right? You know the industry, you have a really good grasp in it. And unfortunately it seems like not all insurance agents maybe know or push the right thing. What can people do to educate themselves? Like if they're not able to buy from you, what kind of questions should they be asking their insurance agents when they go in to review their policy and evaluate their coverage?
On the homeowners, first and foremost, what can happen to my house and is it covered?
Hazard identification.
Yep.
Yeah. Not all homeowners policies, especially here in Wyoming, and I'll even throw Colorado into the conversation as well, 45 minutes away. Not all homeowners policies are created equal. Not every homeowner's policy covers exactly the same causes of loss.
Yeah.
Not every homeowner's policy covers the same causes of loss in the same way. They may offer, roof coverage, but is it replacement cost? Is it actual cash value? Does it cover loss because of wind or hail? Does it cover an older roof, at replacement cost? So many variables that's the first question they need to ask, is what can happen to my house? And are you guys offering a policy that's going to cover it?
Yeah. That's really good insight for our listeners.
So valuable.
So for you, your guys are located in Wyoming. What would you say some of the common hazards for your area? So if we have listeners from Wyoming, what are things that like, hey, I'm going into the insurance, am I prepared for this?
Right.
Our number 1 and number 1A is wind and hail.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
And we're now end of February. We're probably 2.5, 3 months away from, unfortunately, hail season, which runs April to August.
Wow.
And hail around here it's our insurance nemesis is what it is. I don't look forward to this summer because of that.
Right.
So, and that's the thing in Wyoming a lot of people don't think of is that weather, it absolutely drives our rates. I don't know what your guys' looks like in New York, but here wind and hail, snow and ice in the wintertime are absolutely huge factors in not only the auto but the home as well.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. I can imagine.
Yep.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's a great call out. Just understanding. I mean, that's where we our first episode of this podcast, really, it talked about that, identifying your hazards. Like it all starts there. You can't do anything until you really, you understand what you're preparing for. So that's awesome. Now, nationally, I guess, your common hazards there, or you said, are the wind and the hail.
Location. Mm-hmm.
In your location. So now this was something interesting that we had talked about recently, because one of the examples we used in our class for mitigating disaster risk, right? So we used wind as an option. So if you're prone to windstorms, right, and you have your house and you've got trees in your yard next to your house, like
over your power lines,
what the cost of taking down a tree or chopping off some limbs, like of course you're going to be investing some money into that. But now in your experience, like how does that, that the cost of taking down a tree or trimming some branches versus to the claim on the house when the tree falls on the house, because there's in emergency management, we talk about how every dollar invested into mitigating a hazard saves on average $6 to $8 in the recovery costs. Mm-hmm. What is it like in your specific area? What does that look like as far as like that wind, like an average wind claim?
We had a subdivision east of town, just eastern edge of town. 2018 got hit by hail, and we're talking baseball size, maybe a little bigger.
Wow.
A lot of those homeowners claims were $30,000 plus.
Wow.
There were broken windows, there was siding, there was roofs, fencing. I would say the average claim on that was about $30,000, if not maybe even a little bit more.
Wow. I would assume probably similar, if not worse, damage from like a tree falling. So, you'd probably be ballpark around the same, I would think. But yeah, just so it's like, if you could take a little step, chop down,
right,
take some of those branches off or remove the tree, it's going to save you a big headache.
$2,000 to cut those limbs off and, protect against that $30,000 homeowner's claim because that tree falls on the roof and caves it in.
Yeah.
Those are your numbers.
That's the numbers.
Yep.
Yeah. So these are good things for just people to be thinking about and getting a deeper understanding of that
and an appreciation.
Yeah. So maybe thank you guys so much for coming on the show, giving us your insight, your perspective, and kudos to you for really taking that education component seriously with your customers and helping them get that adequate coverage that's really beneficial for them. So how can, if our listeners, especially if they live in the Wyoming area, how can they contact you and stay in touch with you guys?
Farmers Insurance. My name is Brandon Troutner. I'm the agency owner here for this particular office here in Cheyenne. I'm downtown, 601 Randall Avenue. You can give us a call, 307-369-4701. Online as well, search Farmers Insurance, Brandon Troutner. Our web address is super long. I don't even remember exactly what it is.
We'll put it in the show notes. Don't worry. We'll give them link. We'll make it clickable for our listeners.
I think we're on Facebook too. Yeah.
Facebook, Troutner Agency. Hook up with us there and shoot us a message, and we get right back to our clients. Within certainly 24 hours, but a lot of times faster than that.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Brandon and Austin, thank you so much for coming on DisasterClass. We really enjoyed having you guys, and we'll talk to you guys later.
And thank you for your educational approach. That's so valuable.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you guys again. I love the podcast.
Awesome. Very good.
Thanks, man. We'll see you guys later.
Well, Wesley, that was certainly an insightful discussion. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about you, but I think as soon as we're done here today, I'm going to go home or maybe go directly to my insurance agent and evaluate my coverage.
Yeah, you don't have a 10% deductible, do you?
I sure hope not. I don't think so, but best make sure and look over my policy.
Yeah.
But before we conclude this episode of DisasterClass, as always, there is homework.
Absolutely. Please make sure you like and subscribe to DisasterClass. Leave us a 5-star rating because we know you love us. Give us a thumbs up, and please comment about something that maybe you learned or appreciated from this episode.
And as always, if you have any questions, you have a preparedness tip, you have a survivor story, disaster story to share, send us an email at disasterclass@instinctready.com or drop us a message on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. And doing so will put you in the running to be featured on the show and win some cool stuff. So, until next time, stay safe, stay prepared, stay ready.